Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper. It slams the past right into your face when you least expect it. And in that abrupt, jarring collision, you realize just how far you've come, or conversely, how much of the heavy past you are still carrying on your shoulders. Natalie Carter never imagined she would run into her ex-husband, Brandon Walsh, again. Especially not under such extraordinary and thoroughly unexpected circumstances. The last time they saw each other, they had sat across a sterile mahogany table in a lawyer's office, signed their final divorce papers, and walked away in a suffocating haze of heartbreak, exhaustion, and bitter resentment. Now, 2 years later, he is parading around his dazzling new fiancée, Vanessa Green, at high-profile charity functions, completely and utterly clueless about the secret identity of Natalie's new boyfriend, Damian Westwood. What Brandon doesn't know is that Damian isn't just another humble, quiet philanthropist blending into the background of high society. He is a billionaire with immense power, vast resources, and global influence, ready to sweep Natalie into a life of luxury and genuine respect that she never even dared to dream of. Prepare yourself for a roller coaster of revenge, high society scandal, and sweet, bittersweet redemption. Heavy rain lashed against the large, fogged glass windows of a cozy, warmly lit cafe on East 78th Street as Natalie Carter quietly sipped her artisanal cappuccino. It was an unusually cold and dreary afternoon for early May in San Francisco, and the cafe, known locally as Clara's Table, was bustling with locals and tourists alike, all seeking shelter from the sudden, unforgiving downpour. Natalie, dressed in a simple but elegant navy silk blouse and perfectly fitted faded jeans, felt an odd, beautiful blend of inner peace and a faint, lingering unease. Just a year ago, she couldn't have pictured herself sitting here, calm, composed, and breathing easily after the devastating emotional storm of her divorce. As she watched the raindrops race down the glass, her thoughts drifted inevitably back to the day she and Brandon finally finalized their separation. There had been terrible shouting, endless tears, and bitter accusations. Anger and regret had hung so thick in the air it was hard to breathe. They had started out as hopeful college sweethearts, so deeply sure that their love could conquer absolutely anything the world threw at them. But over time, Brandon's natural ambition had mutated, twisting into a cutthroat, ruthless competitiveness. Natalie's pure hope for a supportive, equal partnership shattered completely under the heavy, crushing weight of his relentless criticism. They argued constantly in those final months. They fought about money, about their changing lifestyle, about whose career mattered more, and about their fracturing future. Eventually, the tiny hairline fractures in their marriage turned into wide, deep, unfixable cracks. A blaring taxi horn out on the wet street snapped her abruptly back to the present moment. She blinked, shaking off the ghosts of the past, and instinctively checked her phone resting on the wooden table. Damian Westwood, the incredible man she had been seeing for the past 2 months, had promised to meet her right here after his afternoon board meeting concluded. From there, they had lovely plans to head over to an exclusive art gallery opening hosted by her dear friend, Amira Lynn, a brilliant, up-and-coming art curator in the city. That familiar, overly cautious voice inside Natalie's head warned her not to get too hopeful about Damian. Her past had taught her that the ground could fall out from beneath her at any moment. Yet, since the day they met, Damian had never given her a single reason to doubt him. He was consistently thoughtful, deeply respectful, and shockingly modest for a man whose quiet, sweeping generosity often left her completely speechless. Right then, the brass bell hung above the cafe door jingled brightly. Natalie looked up with a welcoming smile, fully expecting to see Damian's tall silhouette stepping out of the rain. Instead, her heart nearly stopped dead in her chest. Brandon Walsh stepped into the cafe, vigorously shaking the cold rain off his expensive black umbrella. He hadn't changed much at all. He was still tall, still conventionally handsome, still aggressively confident, and still carrying that faint, unmistakable hint of arrogance in the sharp way his eyes scanned the crowded room. Natalie's stomach tightened instantly. A deeply familiar, phantom ache stirred inside her ribs. Her first instinct was flight, She genuinely thought about ducking behind her oversized coffee cup, pretending to be engrossed in her phone, but it was already far too late. He had seen her. "Natalie," he said, his voice carrying easily over the chatter of the cafe as he walked toward her table with a look of cautious, amused curiosity. "Wow. Long time no see." Brandon wore a perfectly tailored, charcoal gray suit that probably cost as much as a month's rent in the upscale Marina district. His hair, which had once been boyish, floppy, and endearing, was now carefully and severely styled with expensive product. He looked every inch the polished, ruthless corporate success he had always desperately wanted to become. Brandon casually glanced at the empty wooden chair across from her. Without bothering to ask for permission, he pulled it out and sat down heavily, completely ignoring the small, irritated line of customers who were still waiting for a table. Typical Brandon. He always believed he had to be the center of attention, the exception to every rule. "Yes, it's been a while," Natalie said, trying her hardest to keep her voice steady and neutral. Despite her best, most practiced efforts, her hands trembled slightly. She gently and deliberately set her ceramic coffee cup back down on its saucer to hide the shaking. It felt incredibly surreal to see him again in such a mundane, unexpected moment. For a brief, fleeting second, she wondered what life had thrown at him lately, what victories he had chased. Then, rushing in like a dark tide, came the bad memories. The loud arguments, the bitter, door-slamming fights that had inevitably led to their split, the endless, exhausting accusations. Who made more money, who supported who gave up more of their dreams. She took a slow, deep, steadying breath, grounding her feet flat against the cafe floor. She wasn't about to let those toxic memories shake her hard-earned peace. "You look good," Brandon said, leaning back casually in the chair, crossing one ankle over his knee. "I heard through the grapevine you moved back into the city. How have you been?" He tried to offer a charming smile, but it came off a little stiff, a little too practiced. They simply weren't the same people who had once shared a bed, a home, and a life. "I'm doing fine," Natalie replied, keeping her answers short. "Just taking things one day at a time. And you? Busy as ever, I assume?" "Busy as ever. I just had a massive meeting nearby with a major client," he said, tapping his fingers rhythmically, almost nervously, on the edge of the table. Then came a heavy, stretching pause. The ambient noise of the cafe seemed to fade into the background. "Listen, I know things didn't exactly end well between us," Brandon started. Natalie mentally braced herself for a snide remark, a passive-aggressive jab, something bitter designed to make her feel small. But instead, he cleared his throat awkwardly and picked up a paper napkin, unnecessarily wiping at a spot on the table that wasn't even there. He was stalling. There was maybe, just maybe, a rare flicker of actual guilt deep in his eyes. "But I do hope you're doing okay," he said at last, his tone softer than she expected. "I am," she answered softly. She didn't know if it was entirely true in that specific, anxious moment, or if she just desperately wanted it to be true. "Really? Brandon, I'm okay." That was exactly when the heavy glass cafe door swung open again, letting in a sudden gust of chilling wind and light, misty drizzle. Natalie's heart skipped a beat, but this time it was for the right reason. Damian walked in, scanning the bustling room. He was tall, striking, and effortlessly composed, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and matching slacks that made him stand out gracefully without demanding attention. He spotted Natalie in the corner, and a genuine, deeply warm smile spread across his handsome face. Brandon followed her shifting gaze, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. His initial confusion quickly gave way to something much colder and far more familiar: calculation. "Natalie," Damian said, walking over to the table with a calm, self-assured, and grounding presence. "I am so sorry I'm late. The meeting ran much longer than expected." He placed a large, gentle hand on her shoulder and leaned down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her cheek. The immense warmth of that small, affectionate gesture sent a profound ripple of comfort completely through her, providing just enough strength to steady the anxious storm that had been rising beneath her skin. Brandon arched a highly skeptical eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. "So, this is?" Natalie felt a brief, suffocating wave of awkwardness rise in her chest, and just under it, a sharp flicker of dread. This collision of her past and her present was inevitable, yet it felt far too soon. "Brandon, this is Damian Westwood. My boyfriend," Natalie said, her voice finding its footing. "Damian, this is Brandon Walsh, my ex-husband." The social tension that immediately hung over the small table was nearly tangible. It clung to the humid air like heavy static right before a violent lightning strike. Damian, ever poised and deeply composed, politely extended his hand toward Brandon. "Nice to meet you," Damian said with quiet, undeniable grace. Brandon took the offered hand, but with a noticeable, rigid stiffness. "Likewise," he replied tightly. He sounded polite enough on the surface, but his sharp eyes betrayed something else entirely. They flickered rapidly over Damian, sizing him up from his watch to his shoes. The exact way a predator might measure a sudden rival in its territory. A flicker of something dark and primal passed silently between the two men. Was it respect? Jealousy? A silent challenge? Natalie couldn't quite tell, but she felt the heavy vibration of it deep in her bones. "Well, I should really get going," Brandon added abruptly, dropping Damian's hand and pushing his chair back. "I have to go pick up Vanessa." Natalie felt a sudden, sharp twinge in her chest at the name. She vaguely remembered Brandon casually mentioning a beautiful, ambitious coworker named Vanessa during the miserable last year of their marriage. She was someone he had seemed to admire openly, maybe a little too much. During their fights, Natalie had wondered if there was more to it, or perhaps it had just been her own exhausting insecurities playing tricks on her mind. But if it had only been in her head, why did hearing her name now still sting like a bitter truth left unspoken? Either way, the casual mention of her stirred something sharp and defensive beneath the surface. Brandon was engaged now, apparently. Still, Natalie effortlessly masked her churning emotions with a highly practiced expression of absolute neutrality. She had worn that specific, blank mask so often in the final, agonizing year of their marriage that it fit her face like a second skin. "Nice running into you, Natalie," Brandon said, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He then nodded curtly at Damian. "And it was nice meeting you, Mr. Westwood. Maybe we'll cross paths again in the city." Damian gave a polite, perfectly measured smile that revealed absolutely nothing. "Perhaps. Take care." With that, Brandon turned and slipped out of the crowded cafe, pushing back out into the rain, leaving behind the faint, lingering trail of his expensive, spicy cologne and a heavy cloud of unanswered questions. Natalie inhaled slowly, the scent immediately triggering a visceral memory of their shared apartment that she desperately didn't want. Damian gracefully pulled out the chair Brandon had just vacated and sat across from Natalie, placing a large, careful, and warm hand directly over hers. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his eyes searching her face with genuine concern. Natalie forced a brighter smile, absolutely determined not to let this random encounter throw her entire day off course. "I'm okay," she murmured, squeezing his fingers. "Just surprised, that's all. It's been a long time." He gently squeezed her hand back, his thumb tracing her knuckles. "If he ever bothers you, or if you just need some space to process this, tell me. I'll handle it." There was absolutely no toxic, macho bravado in his deep voice. There was just a quiet, unshakable resolve. He meant it. "No, it's fine," she said quickly, wanting to wave the shadow away. "I'm over him. At least, I really think I am." She let out a long, shuddering sigh, trying her hardest to ignore the frustrating way Brandon's mere presence still made her chest feel tight. It wasn't from longing. It was from the deeply familiar. exhausted ache of having once loved someone with her whole heart who never, ever truly saw her for who she was. "Let's just head to the gallery," she said, standing up and grabbing her purse. "Amira is expecting us, and I want to see her new exhibit." Damian nodded easily, rising to his feet and helping her slip into her trench coat like the perfect, attentive gentleman he always was. As they stepped back out into the rain-slicked, bustling streets of the city, Natalie realized Brandon had left her with a complex swirl of emotions she wasn't quite ready to unpack. Swirling inside her mind was a massive storm of chaotic thoughts. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that this brief, unexpected encounter was only the very beginning of a tangled, dangerous web that was about to unfold. It was a web that would violently pit old, rotting resentments against bright, new hopes, and uncover a secret so incredibly staggering that absolutely no one involved would walk away unchanged. 2 days later, the sun had finally returned to the city. Natalie found herself tucked in the bright, sunlit corner of her apartment, sitting cross-legged on the floor, slowly flipping through old, dusty photo albums she had shoved deep into storage immediately after the divorce. Why she had chosen this particular, quiet morning to revisit those painful memories, she wasn't entirely sure. Maybe seeing Brandon in the flesh had stirred something dormant deep inside her, a heavy flood of nostalgia that was both incredibly sweet and terribly bitter. Her phone buzzed loudly on the hardwood floor beside her. It was a rapid-fire text from Amira Lynn. "Did you see the article in the Chronicle about Brandon's upcoming engagement party? Apparently it's going to be huge. Like front-page society pages huge. You okay?" Natalie sighed, picking up the phone, and quickly typed back, "I'm fine, just a bit surprised. We actually ran into each other at Clara's 2 days ago." Amira responded instantly with a barrage of shocked, wide-eyed emojis, followed by a block of text. "He's totally showing off, Nat. Vanessa, word is she's from a massive, big-name old money family back east. Sounds like they're throwing a ridiculously over-the-top, millions of dollars event next month. If you need backup or a lot of wine, you know I'm your girl." Natalie exhaled deeply, setting the phone down. "So that was it," she whispered to the empty room. Brandon, who had always been deeply, unhealthily obsessed with social status and climbing the corporate ladder, was turning his new engagement into a massive social spectacle. She felt a sudden, sharp flicker of something she couldn't quite name in her chest. Hurt, maybe? Grief? Years ago, when they were still happy, they had once stayed up late talking about having a vow renewal for their upcoming 10th anniversary. They had planned for it to be something intimate, something deeply real. Just family and their closest friends on a beach somewhere. That quiet, beautiful dream had crumbled into dust, completely replaced now by his new glittering, performative celebration with someone else. She turned another heavy, plastic-lined page in the album. There it was, a candid photo from their early college years. Brandon, all messy hair, bright, gleaming eyes, and a carefree smile, hugging her tightly from behind in front of their brick dorm building. That younger, unburdened version of them looked so incredibly hopeful, so deeply sure they had forever ahead of them. How had it all gone so terribly wrong? She aggressively set the photo album aside, refusing to let herself spiral down into the dark abyss of what-ifs. Life had changed drastically since the divorce. She was no longer that meek, accommodating version of herself. She had her very own architecture firm now, Carter Design Studio. She had intentionally kept the Carter name after the split, mostly because the business had been legally registered and branded under it well before the marriage completely fell apart, and she refused to let him take her professional identity too. It had been incredibly hard work, but she'd built a small, highly respected, and promising client list all on her own. And then, of course, there was Damian. He had entered her quiet life like a sudden, reviving breath of fresh, ocean air. She thought of his kind, crinkling eyes, his deep laugh, and his easy, incredibly calming presence. They had met completely by chance at a high-end charity gala that Amira had dragged her to several months ago. He had been quietly introduced to her group as a philanthropic donor. one who specifically kept a very low, private profile despite his apparent massive generosity to various social causes. They had clicked instantly over a glass of champagne, bonding effortlessly over their shared, passionate love for modern art, sustainable architecture, and global travel. She'd only heard vague, whispered hints from others about the actual depth of his wealth, something about a massive inheritance from his visionary grandfather, and a controlling stake in a global tech empire. But Damian rarely, if ever, talked about money or his ownership in a tech conglomerate. Though Damian avoided discussing his finances, his actions spoke volumes about his character. When he first asked Natalie out for dinner, she had hesitated for days, deeply unsure if her bruised heart was ready for anything serious again. But something profound about Damian made her feel entirely safe. Trust, which had been so thoroughly broken by Brandon, came surprisingly easily with him. They had been quietly, beautifully building their relationship ever since. Her phone pinged again, pulling her sharply from the thick fog of old memories. This time, the screen lit up with a message from Damian himself. "Dinner tonight? Or I can swing by your studio, and we can just grab casual drinks after you finish up." Natalie smiled brightly at the screen, a soft, radiating warmth washing over her entire body. She typed back happily, "Dinner sounds perfect. I'm heading to the studio for a few hours to finish some drafts, but I'll be completely free by 6. See you then." She gently but firmly closed the heavy photo album and slid it back into its dusty cardboard box. Carrying it to the bedroom and tucking it deep into the darkest corner of her closet. It was a symbolic act, perhaps, desperately hoping she could permanently store away all the emotional baggage right along with it. Brandon and Vanessa's grand, opulent engagement party would no doubt become the relentless buzz of the city's social circles for weeks. But Natalie didn't care. She had her own vibrant life now, her very own story to write. Still, despite her positive affirmations, something dark gnawed at the edges of her mind. It was a strange, undeniable intuition that her complicated path with Brandon wasn't quite finished yet. She felt a creeping dread that the arrogant ex-husband she had tried so hard to leave in the past might soon come charging violently back into her life, bringing a hurricane of drama in his wake. Later that evening, the delicate brass chime above the heavy glass door of a charming, authentic French bistro rang clearly as Damian gently guided Natalie inside, his large hand resting lightly and protectively at the small of her back. The restaurant Maison Lune was currently one of the most sought-after, exclusive dining spots in Pacific Heights. It was famous for its perfectly layered soufflés, its romantic, low-lit atmosphere, and an impeccable encyclopedic wine list. Soft, sultry jazz floated seamlessly in the background, mingling beautifully with the warm, amber glow casting down from antique brass chandeliers. The impeccably dressed maitre d' recognized Damian immediately. With a respectful nod, he led them effortlessly past the crowded main floor to a secluded, private corner table tucked away from curious, prying glances. Natalie settled comfortably into her plush velvet seat, admiring the elegant, sophisticated place setting. The polished silverware gleamed. The crisp white linen tablecloth was flawless. Everything was arranged with meticulous care. She noticed out of the corner of her eye a few well-dressed diners at nearby tables casting subtle, lingering glances toward Damian, as though they recognized his face from a magazine, or at least highly suspected he was someone notable and powerful. She was slowly getting used to it by now. Any time they went out in public, there was always that little, undeniable ripple of speculation that followed him. Damian handled it with absolute, quiet grace. He was never arrogant, never flashy, never overly revealing, just perfectly, consistently poised. "I took the liberty of pre-ordering a bottle of your absolute favorite red," Damian said, his smile warm and incredibly handsome in the candlelight. "I thought we really needed to celebrate your big news properly." Natalie's lips curved upward with sheer delight. Earlier that very day, after months of grueling proposals and pitch meetings, she had officially signed a massive, career-changing contract with a luxury boutique hotel chain. It was an incredible opportunity that could instantly elevate Carter Design Studio from a small local firm to the absolute next level nationally. The hotel executives had discovered her innovative work through social media and reached out, directly after being blown away by her latest digital portfolio. "That is so incredibly thoughtful of you," she said, her eyes shining. "I honestly still can't believe they actually picked my design. I was up against firms with 10 times my staff." Damian reached across the small, candlelit table and took her hands in his. "You deserve absolutely every single piece of this success. Congratulations, Natalie." There was something so profound about the way he said it, soft, certain, unshakable, like he truly, deeply believed in her talent far more than she had ever believed in herself. A sophisticated sommelier approached the table with the wine, expertly opening it and carefully pouring them each a generous glass. They toasted quietly, looking into each other's eyes, the soft, melodic clink of fine crystal echoing sweetly through the intimate space. Outside the restaurant, the evening rain had returned, streaking the large windows, blurring the bright city lights into soft watercolors, and beautifully cocooning them in their own quiet, perfect world. Natalie took a slow sip, the velvety, complex red wine warming her throat and settling her nerves. The conversation between them flowed as naturally as a river as they caught up on every detail of each other's day. Damian casually mentioned an upcoming, high-stakes trip to London for a major global philanthropic conference. Though true to his usual form, he expertly avoided sharing too many specific details about his deep financial affairs or the exact business entities involved. She wondered, not for the first time, what exactly he held back. She knew it wasn't out of malicious secrecy, but perhaps out of long-ingrained habit, or a necessary layer of protection he had built around himself. There were definitely high, thick walls around Damian Westwood, elegant and polite, but incredibly firm. Natalie, on the other hand, lit up like a star as she spoke passionately about her new, cutting-edge design concepts for the boutique hotel. Her creative mind had been racing nonstop with brilliant ideas since the moment the contract was signed. She described her rough sketches, her ambitious mood boards, and her vision for the lobby with a kind of electric energy and pure joy she hadn't felt in years. And Damian listened. He didn't just nod politely while waiting for his turn to speak. He listened with deep, real, engaged interest, asking insightful questions about her material choices and spatial flow. Halfway through the incredible meal, her plate filled with a rich, perfectly braised coq au vin, and his with a flawlessly seared wild salmon, Damian slowly set down his silver fork and cleared his throat softly. "I've been thinking," he began, glancing down at his plate for a fraction of a second as if carefully gathering the exact right words, "about introducing you to some people in my wider circle. Close friends, key business associates. I want them to finally know about the incredible, brilliant woman I'm with." There was a sudden, rare flicker of raw vulnerability in his deep voice that she rarely saw. He looked at her as if her answer mattered to him more than he was letting on. Natalie paused, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. "You do?" she asked, her heart unexpectedly skipping a beat. It wasn't just the casual invitation to a party. It was the massive, underlying meaning beneath it. The strict, protective line between his highly private, billionaire world and her normal, everyday life was about to blur significantly. They had been dating exclusively for a couple of months, and their emotional connection had been growing exponentially stronger by the day. Still, officially meeting people from his elite inner circle felt like a massive, terrifying step, especially when those exclusive circles likely included powerful global executives, foreign dignitaries, and high society influencers. Would they look down their noses at her as an outsider? Would they think she was a gold digger? Worse, would she look at herself that way too? Damian nodded slowly, placing his linen napkin gently on the table. "I absolutely do not want to pressure you if you aren't ready, but there is a very important foundation fundraiser next week. I'd really like you to come. I want you to be by my side, if that's okay with you." He held her gaze across the flickering candle with a quiet, burning intensity, as though silently, desperately reassuring her that she absolutely belonged anywhere she chose to be. A complex swirl of emotions strongly tugged at her heart, thrilling excitement, intense curiosity, and a very real flicker of intimidating nerves. "Of course," she replied softly, a genuine smile breaking across her face. "I'd be incredibly honored to go with you, Damian." Damian's handsome face instantly lit up with immense warmth and relief. He reached across the table again, gently rubbing his large thumb over her delicate knuckles. "Thank you. I'm really truly happy to have you in my life, Natalie." She smiled brightly at him, but a small part of her heart ached in the absolute best, most beautiful way. It ached like a deep wound that was finally healing. Healing so much faster than she could have ever processed. They lingered for over an hour over dessert, sharing an exquisite, rich flourless chocolate torte, talking effortlessly about lighter things, their favorite classic books, funny childhood memories, and grand travel dreams they hoped to fulfill. Natalie found herself floating in a warm, quiet sense of total contentment, deeply warmed by the beautiful possibility of a bright new chapter ahead of her. For the very first time in what felt like a lifetime, the future didn't feel like a terrifying storm she had to constantly brace for. It felt like something wonderful she could finally reach for. Brandon's toxic name hovered entirely unspoken between them the entire night. But she didn't feel even a slight need to bring him up. Tonight belonged exclusively to Damian. It belonged to peace. It belonged to hope. By the time they finally finished their wine, the bistro had begun to empty and close for the night. "I'll drive you home," Damian said smoothly, guiding her warmly out the door to a sleek, waiting black sedan idling silently at the curb. She vividly remembered the very first time he had shown up for a date with a private driver. She had stubbornly insisted on taking a yellow cab because the grand idea of arriving at a restaurant in a chauffeured town car felt far too indulgent and overwhelming. But over time, she had slowly become much more comfortable with the realities of the life Damian lived. Even though she still stubbornly insisted on paying her own way for her own things whenever she possibly could, she had grown much more at ease with stepping into Damian's world. Inside the quiet, luxurious car, Damian's strong arm draped comfortably around her shoulders as she leaned tiredly but happily into his side. Relaxed and safe, she closed her eyes, letting the soft, rhythmic glow of the passing city lights flicker across the tinted windows as they wove smoothly through the hilly streets of San Francisco. The low, powerful hum of the expensive engine lulled her into a quiet, peaceful reverie. In that perfect moment, she allowed herself to fully believe that maybe, just maybe, her life was finally moving forward, forever free from the crushing heartbreak that had once so totally consumed her. The next morning, bright, inspiring sunlight streamed through the tall, industrial windows of Natalie's architecture studio. She sat perched at her large wooden drafting table, carefully and meticulously finalizing the initial sketches for the boutique hotel project. Her precise pencil strokes curved effortlessly into elegant lines, forming grand arches and modern forms that perfectly reflected her unique vision of a highly modern, yet warmly inviting interior space. The sharp, sudden ring of her desk phone jolted her right out of her deep creative flow. "Natalie Carter. Carter Design Studio," she answered professionally, tucking her graphite pencil behind her ear. "Natalie." "It's me," came Amira's highly animated, breathless voice through the receiver. "You are literally not going to believe this." Natalie sat up straighter in her stool, her pulse ticking up a notch. "What? What is it?" "I just heard from a close colleague of mine at the Chronicle that Brandon and Vanessa are hosting their massive engagement soiree at the Four Seasons downtown next week. And guess what? They are apparently inviting absolutely everyone from your old married circle. Friends, casual acquaintances, even a few of your past business clients." Natalie's stomach instantly turned over, a sour feeling rising in her throat. Why on earth would they invite my clients? Why would they invite me, though? She asked, bewildered. Yeah, that is exactly the weird part, Amira replied, her tone dripping with suspicion. Word on the street is that Brandon actually didn't want you there at all. But Vanessa heavily insisted on it. She explicitly told the Chronicle reporter she wants a harmonious, blended future. Or if you ask me, maybe she just really wants to flex her new diamond a little in your face. Amira paused, then softened her tone considerably. I know you probably don't care about him anymore, Nat, but I really thought you should know immediately, just in case a physical invitation actually shows up in your mail. Natalie let out a long, slow, frustrated breath. She hadn't expected Brandon's new engagement to go quite so aggressively public. But knowing his deep, pathetic obsession with public appearances and social climbing, she really wasn't shocked. Thanks for the heads up, Amira, Natalie said, rubbing her temples. If I actually get invited, I'll think long and hard before deciding to do anything. I probably just won't RSVP. Just remember, Amira added fiercely, the protective best friend mode activating. You do not owe either of them a single, solitary thing. Natalie smiled faintly at the phone. I know. Thank you. How's Damian? By the way, Amira asked, seamlessly shifting the subject to brighter things. At the mere mention of his name, Natalie's lips curved upward into a genuine smile. He's really good. Actually, we had a great dinner last night. He wants to formally introduce me to his inner circle at this fancy foundation fundraiser next week. Amira laughed with delight. Ooh, a big, glamorous week coming up for you, huh? Better you than me. Dealing with all those rich snobs. But seriously, Nat, I am so incredibly happy for you. You deserve this. And remember, if you need a +1 to Brandon's absolute fiasco of a party, or if you just need a literal bodyguard to throw a drink in his face, I am your girl. They ended the call with a laugh, and Natalie sat staring silently at the phone for a long beat, her complicated thoughts swirling like a tempest. She was absolutely certain that Brandon's highly publicized event would be a sparkling, obnoxious showcase of high society and corporate power brokers, a loud, desperate celebration of new wealth, bought influence, and fake, polished smiles. Vanessa Green, she now distinctly remembered from passing gossip, came from incredibly old, established Boston money. Rumor had it she was a brilliant, razor-sharp corporate attorney in her own right. Brandon probably looked at Vanessa and saw the absolute perfect combination for his life goals. A romantic interest and a massive strategic advantage to propel his career into the stratosphere. A romantic and strategic match made in corporate heaven. That very afternoon, exactly as Amira had warned, a uniformed delivery courier arrived at the glass doors of Natalie's apartment building with a large, incredibly thick, cream-colored envelope heavily embossed in shiny gold foil. Her pulse quickened as she signed for it. A cold chill ran rapidly through her body despite the warm, comforting cup of herbal tea she held in her other hand. Something about the sheer, heavy weight of the expensive envelope felt deeply ominous, like holding a bomb. The ornate return address printed on the back flap read elegantly, Mr. Brandon Walsh and Miss Vanessa Green. She sighed, dropping it onto her kitchen counter. So, the ridiculous rumors were entirely true. They had actually invited her. Taking a deep breath, she slid a letter opener through the thick paper. Inside, the invitation was printed on heavy cardstock, glossy and unmistakably, aggressively extravagant. It detailed a black-tie upcoming soiree at the grand ballroom of the Four Seasons. Natalie quickly slipped the card back into the envelope, deeply unsure whether to immediately toss it into the kitchen trash can, or bury it deep in a junk drawer where she would never have to look at it again. It seemed far too loud and flashy to just ignore, yet far too insulting to actually acknowledge. A large part of her strongly suspected this was a highly calculated, manipulative move by Vanessa, either to appear falsely gracious and saintly to the public, or to maliciously flaunt their massive social elevation right in the face of the woman Brandon left behind. Or maybe it was something much more insidious. A very subtle, cruel message from her ex-husband. You're welcome to come and watch exactly what you lost out on. Later that evening, as she settled comfortably into her plush velvet couch with a warm, knitted throw blanket draped over her lap, Natalie mulled endlessly over the gold-rimmed invitation. She decided she would bring it up with Damian and get his calm, logical perspective on the matter. Her initial instinct was that they should just skip it entirely and spend the night watching a movie. But the heavy envelope still sat prominently on her glass coffee table like a physical dare. A glossy, expensive provocation written in looping cursive print. She had absolutely no desire to watch Brandon proudly parade his new fiancée around a crowded ballroom. She had no desire to watch them toast with vintage champagne in the exact same room where she might still be seen by his friends as a pathetic, discarded ghost. And yet, a tiny, defiant voice deep inside her soul whispered that maybe, just maybe, it would be incredibly empowering to walk into that room on her own terms, looking beautiful, accompanied by a man who truly cherished her. To show Brandon and everyone else who had doubted her that she was absolutely no longer the sad, broken woman Brandon had callously left behind. To prove that she had risen spectacularly from the gray ashes of their toxic past. Not bitter, but vastly better. She picked up her phone and dialed Damian's number. He answered on the second ring, his deep voice instantly soothing her fraying nerves. "Natalie," he greeted warmly. "I was actually just thinking of you." "Well," she said, a hint of dry, cynical amusement in her voice. "I've just received something very interesting in the mail." "Oh." Natalie exhaled a long breath. An invitation to Brandon's grand engagement soiree. Damian paused on the other end of the line, the silence stretching for a thoughtful moment. "How are you feeling about that?" he asked, his tone completely free of judgment. She curled tighter into the corner of the couch, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. "I'm deeply conflicted. Part of me wants absolutely nothing to do with it, but another part of me, I don't know. Damian, maybe I just want closure. Maybe I just want to look him in the eye and prove to myself that I'm truly okay." Her voice wavered slightly, caught delicately in the turbulent space between old, unhealed wounds and her bright new strength. She hesitated before adding, "Also, the weird thing is, it wasn't Brandon who sent it. Vanessa specifically invited me. It almost feels like a deliberate trap, but maybe I'm just reading way too much into it. Or maybe it was exactly that. Cruel bait cleverly disguised as high society courtesy." Damian's voice came through the speaker, incredibly calm and deeply reassuring. "Natalie, whatever you decide to do, I will be right there with you. If you want to go and face him, I will put on a tuxedo and stand proudly by your side. If you don't want to go, we can throw the invitation in the trash and do something else. We can drive up the coast, go to a nice dinner, do something far away from that circus. It is entirely your choice." His supportive words wrapped around her tired heart like impenetrable armor, quiet, but absolutely bulletproof. Natalie's tense body physically relaxed, the tight, anxious knot in her chest finally loosening its grip. The emotional storm inside her didn't entirely pass, but it finally hit a pause. "I'll think about it," she said softly, a genuine smile touching her lips. "For now, we still have your important foundation fundraiser next week. That's where my main focus is right now." What Natalie didn't realize as she hung up the phone was that the upcoming days would bring a massive, explosive collision of completely different worlds. Brandon, Vanessa, and Damian, each existing in vastly different stratospheres of life, were about to violently converge in a way she could never possibly predict. And when they finally did collide, the resulting fallout would be unlike anything she had ever experienced in her life. The following week arrived in a dizzying blur of nervous energy and high anticipation. Natalie stood silently in front of the massive, gilded mirror in Damian's penthouse master bedroom. The sleek, incredibly spacious home sat high in the clouds, overlooking the glittering span of the Bay Bridge. The sprawling city skyline twinkled brightly in the distance, looking like a beautiful, glittering mosaic of light, wealth, and infinite possibility. She wore a breathtaking, elegant emerald green evening gown that hugged her figure just right, the rich silk cascading down to the floor. Amira had come over earlier in the afternoon, armed with makeup brushes and hairpins, to help style Natalie's dark hair into a soft, romantic, loose chignon. Now, as Natalie stood alone and looked deeply at her own reflection, she saw something she hadn't seen looking back at her in a very long time: quiet, unshakable confidence. She wasn't entirely sure she felt it 100% internally yet, but at the very least, she undeniably looked the part of a powerful woman. Damian, adjusting his heavy platinum cufflinks, stepped up softly behind her. His eyes met hers in the mirror. "You look absolutely breathtaking," he murmured, his deep voice rumbling as he leaned down to press a gentle, warm kiss to her temple. "Are you ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Natalie replied with a small, nervous smile, smoothing her hands over the silk of her dress. "I still don't really know who all is going to be there tonight." Damian paused for a moment, resting his hands on her waist. "It's going to be a large mix. Global philanthropists, tech investors, a few politicians, and some celebrities who support the foundation's work. These big events can honestly be a lot to handle. If at any point you feel overwhelmed or you just want to leave, just say the word and we are out the door." They rode down the private elevator and arrived at the grand, historic ballroom of the Laurelwood Hotel. They were immediately greeted by a blinding frenzy of flashing paparazzi cameras and a long line of sleek, black luxury cars rolling smoothly up to the valet entrance. A massive crowd of highly polished donors, tycoons, and glittering socialites flowed steadily toward the main entrance doors. Natalie stayed very close to Damian, linking her arm through his, feeling a massive rush of relief as they finally stepped inside the elegantly adorned, secure venue. Massive, tiered crystal chandeliers sparkled blindingly overhead, casting a warm glow, while liveried servers moved gracefully through the dense crowd with silver trays of bubbling champagne flutes. Almost immediately, a striking, older woman with perfectly coiffed auburn hair and an ostentatious diamond necklace approached them, beaming brightly. "Damian, darling," she cooed loudly, leaning in and kissing both of his cheeks in the traditional European greeting. "It is so incredibly good to see you." She pulled back and her sharp, assessing eyes landed on Natalie. "And who is this absolutely stunning lady?" Damian placed a warm hand gently at the small of Natalie's back, a gesture of both pride and protection. "Monica, I'd like you to meet Natalie Carter, my girlfriend. Natalie, this is Monica Herrera. She's the chairwoman on the board of the Global Arts Foundation." Monica's heavily mascaraed eyes lit up with genuine delight. "An absolute pleasure to meet you. My dear, Damian has told me all about you. He said you're a brilliant architect. How absolutely wonderful. We simply must sit down and talk about the new cultural center we're currently developing over in Berkeley. We need fresh, visionary eyes on it." They exchanged warm pleasantries, and though Natalie smiled graciously and answered her questions, she felt slightly overwhelmed by the sheer, imposing energy of Monica's presence. More and more important people soon joined their small circle, and the conversations followed a very predictable, elite rhythm: cordial, polite introductions, mild but probing curiosity about Natalie's family and professional background, and then a rapid, seamless pivot to massive philanthropic endeavors or multi-million-dollar business ventures. She quickly and acutely realized that many of these guests lived in a financial stratosphere far, far beyond her own, a hidden world where global alliances were casually formed over charity galas, and seven-figure donations were written off as casually as buying a cup of coffee. Midway through the glittering evening, needing a brief moment of quiet, Natalie drifted away from the loud crowd toward a quieter corner of the room to admire a beautiful photography exhibit highlighting the Foundation's global work. There were striking, high-definition photos of state-of-the-art hospitals built in underserved regions, joyous art scholarships awarded to young, underprivileged talents, and massive environmental restoration projects spanning multiple continents. She was quietly reading a small brass plaque about an elephant conservation effort in Africa when a loud, boisterous voice startled her from behind. "Natalie Carter? Is that you?" The voice was deeply male and uncomfortably, vaguely familiar. She turned around, and her blood froze in her veins. It was David Russell. He was an old, sleazy acquaintance of Brandon's, and someone her ex-husband used to frequently meet with at bars to scheme about sketchy real estate ventures. David's beady eyes widened in exaggerated recognition, a smarmy grin spreading across his face. "I almost didn't believe it was you." "Wow. How are you?" Natalie forced a tight, polite smile, though her body tensed defensively. "I'm well, David. I certainly didn't expect to see you at an event like this." Her voice was calm and measured, but a deeply familiar, suffocating tightness crept rapidly into her chest. It was the exact kind of suffocating anxiety that came from standing way too close to toxic old ghosts. "Oh, I'm a corporate sponsor," he replied smoothly, swirling the expensive red wine in his crystal glass. "It's always good for PR and business to donate to worthy causes, right?" He gave a wide, oily grin that didn't quite reach his cold eyes. It was the exact kind of soulless grin that loudly declared, "I'm only here to be seen by the right people, not to actually feel anything or help anyone." "Actually," David continued, stepping a little too close, "I've got a VIP table reserved right next to Brandon Walsh at the big engagement party next week. Are you planning to attend?" Natalie felt her entire posture stiffen like a physical reflex. Her spine straightened into an iron rod, and her breath caught painfully in her throat. The mere casual mention of Brandon's name still came accompanied by a shock of static electricity. "I'm still deciding," she said carefully, giving him absolutely nothing to work with. David chuckled low in his throat, a condescending sound. "You should definitely go. Nat Brandon's been bragging nonstop all over town about his new fiancée. Something about her powerful father's deep political connections in D.C. He's definitely on a massive roll right now. Might be worth showing up just to see what you're missing out on." A hot, fast flicker of intense annoyance rippled through her body, and just beneath it, something much sharper. Disgust, maybe. Absolute disgust at how easily and callously Brandon turned human relationships into cold, calculated business strategies. "Trust me, David, I know exactly what I left behind, and I'm not missing anything," she replied coolly, her eyes locking onto his with a newfound ferocity. "Besides, I'm here tonight with someone else." She glanced quickly around the crowded room, desperately hoping Damian would magically appear and give her an easy out. She didn't ever want to look like a damsel in distress who needed rescuing, but just this once, she wouldn't mind the immediate interruption. David caught the blatant hint, his smug smile faltering slightly at her cold dismissal. All right, I'll let you go mingle. Take care of yourself, Natalie." He winked at her, a subtle, deeply smug, infuriating gesture, and drifted away into the crowd like a dark shadow that had vastly overstayed its welcome. He wandered off, wine glass still in hand, leaving a highly bitter, metallic taste behind in the air. He was a walking, talking reminder of a miserable life she no longer wanted any part of. She exhaled a shaky breath and leaned heavily against the wooden exhibit display, trying desperately to collect her racing thoughts. A large, abstract painting of a fractured, chaotic cityscape loomed on the wall behind her, feeling far too metaphorical for her current comfort. Suddenly, a large, incredibly warm hand touched her bare shoulder. She spun around, startled. Damian was standing there, deep concern etched into his handsome eyes. An immense wave of relief washed violently through her, like warm sunlight breaking through a dense, freezing fog. "Is everything okay?" Damian asked softly, looking in the direction David had gone. Natalie nodded, forcing a small, reassuring smile. "Yeah, it was just someone from my old life. Can we please get some fresh air?" Of course, he said immediately. He placed his hand on the small of her back and expertly guided her through the dense crowd to a massive stone terrace overlooking the glittering, sprawling city skyline below. The cool, damp night breeze brushed soothingly against her flushed cheeks. She closed her eyes for a long moment, gripping the stone balustrade, steadying her breathing, deeply comforted by Damian's solid, protective presence standing right behind her. "Natalie," Damian said quietly, his deep voice barely audible over the wind. "I know that suddenly bumping into toxic people from your past can violently stir up things you'd much rather leave buried behind you. But I hope you know that I am always here for you." She turned around to face him, hot tears suddenly threatening to rise and spill over her lashes. It wasn't just seeing David that had upset her. It was the entire, heavy, tangled history of her marriage threatening to rise violently back to the surface and pull her under. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm okay. I promise. It's really hard sometimes. Brandon's engagement party is just a few days away. And I guess I'm still internally dealing with how badly he used to constantly undermine me and make me feel small. I don't want to be that pathetic, bitter woman who just can't let go of the past." She hated how her voice cracked so obviously on the last word, but it felt incredibly honest to say it out loud. Damian reached out slowly, gently brushing a stray, wind-blown strand of dark hair away from her face. "You are absolutely not that woman," he said softly, his eyes fierce with conviction. "You are strong. But if you feel like you truly need to go to that ridiculous party to finally get closure and shut the door on him, I will go with you. We will face him together." A small, bright spark of immense gratitude flared to life in her chest. And with it came the sudden, empowering realization that this upcoming party wasn't just about confronting the past anymore. It was about firmly reclaiming her rightful place in her own future. "I appreciate that more than you know," she murmured, stepping closer and resting her head gently against his broad, warm shoulder. High above the restless city, standing under the golden, electric shimmer of the skyscraper lights, Natalie couldn't shake the deep, vibrating feeling in her bones that something massive was stirring in the universe. She knew that Brandon's grand, ostentatious event wouldn't just be an engagement celebration. Deep, dark secrets were rapidly rising to the surface, secrets that could utterly change everything she believed about her past and everything she hoped for her future. A week later, the grand entrance of the Four Seasons Hotel shimmered with blinding opulence as Natalie arrived, stepping out of a black town car, hand in hand with Damian. After much agonizing thought and many long conversations, she had bravely decided to attend Brandon's engagement soiree. It felt exactly like the necessary, painful final step required to permanently close and lock the door on that traumatic chapter of her life. Damian, dressed impeccably in a sleek, custom-tailored black tuxedo, stood exceptionally tall and steady beside her, radiating a calm, quiet, impenetrable strength. Natalie wore a breathtaking, midnight blue silk gown that draped and contrasted beautifully with her dark hair and pale skin. For the very first time in what felt like a decade, she felt a burning inner confidence she desperately wished she'd possessed years earlier. A long, plush red carpet stretched out along the hotel entrance, where a swarm of aggressive paparazzi snapped hundreds of rapid-fire photos of high-profile guests, CEOs, state politicians, and wealthy socialites as they stepped out of their cars and into the exclusive event. Inside the massive double doors, a lavish, towering floral arrangement of white orchids and roses dominated the center of the grand foyer. Soft, classical music floated elegantly in from a live string quartet positioned in the corner of the ballroom, while dozens of waiters glided silently between the wealthy guests, offering silver trays of vintage champagne and decadent hors d'oeuvres. Within minutes of checking their coats, Brandon suddenly appeared through the crowd. He looked sharp and expensive in a custom-tailored, midnight blue suit. However, his smug expression flickered with absolute, unhidden surprise as his eyes landed squarely on Natalie, looking more beautiful than he remembered, standing arm in arm with Damian. At his side stood his new prize, Vanessa Green. She was radiant and practically glowing in a silver, sequin designer gown that shimmered like liquid metal under the massive chandelier light. Her auburn hair was swept up into a graceful, complex updo. Vanessa's sharp gaze settled immediately on Natalie, sizing her up with polite but intense interest. "Natalie," Vanessa greeted warmly, stepping forward and extending a manicured hand. "I am so incredibly glad you could actually make it. Brandon mentioned he'd randomly run into you in the city recently." Natalie firmly shook her hand, immediately noting the massive, blinding 5-carat diamond ring resting heavily on Vanessa's left finger. "Thank you so much for the invitation, Vanessa," she said with a perfectly executed, carefully polite smile. Brandon cleared his throat loudly, clearly uncomfortable with the interaction. "Damian," he said with a stiff nod of his head. "Good to see you again." "Likewise. Congratulations on your engagement." "Brandon," Damian responded with effortless, calm grace, his tone perfectly even. An incredibly awkward, heavy pause followed the exchange, stretching for several agonizing seconds before Vanessa gently, almost protectively, touched Brandon's arm and smoothly excused them both to go greet a group of arriving senators. Natalie exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding and looked up at Damian with quiet, profound gratitude. "Well, that wasn't too bad," she whispered, though her pulse still thudded wildly in her chest like a trapped bird. They made their way deeper into the cavernous ballroom, sampling the high-end hors d'oeuvres and chatting politely with a few mutual acquaintances from her past life. Amira was there, too, looking stunning in a red dress with her boyfriend, and she enthusiastically waved Natalie over to a quiet corner near the bar. They chatted animatedly for a bit, with Amira gleefully slipping in dry, highly witty, and scathing remarks about Brandon's clearly over-the-top, tacky decor choices. But despite the shared laughter and the flowing champagne, a very subtle, electric current of tension wove its way through the entire evening. From afar, Natalie and Damian watched as Brandon and Vanessa held court in the center of the room. Vanessa was undeniably poised and highly polished, exuding a calm, terrifying sophistication in every single glance and calculated gesture. Brandon, for his part, appeared visibly proud, puffing his chest out, looking almost smug as he introduced his new, well-connected fiancée to some of the most high-powered financial figures in the room. It was a blatant, transparent spectacle of social maneuvering and networking that made Natalie's head spin with familiar exhaustion. Partway through the glittering night, a sudden hush fell over the massive ballroom. Brandon confidently stepped up to a microphone placed on a small stage and tapped it twice, the sound echoing sharply. "Good evening, absolutely everyone," he said, his amplified voice echoing loudly through the grand hall. "Vanessa and I want to sincerely thank you all for being here with us tonight to celebrate our engagement. We are beyond thrilled to share our immense happiness and our bright future with so many of our closest friends and esteemed colleagues." His smile was perfectly polished, his tone modulated to sound just humble enough to pass for genuine, though Natalie knew it was highly rehearsed. A wave of polite, wealthy applause rippled across the well-dressed crowd. Vanessa gracefully took the microphone from him, flashing a poised, picture-perfect smile. "I couldn't be more grateful to have a man like Brandon by my side. We are so looking forward to many incredible milestones together. And we are deeply touched to have all our friends and family here supporting us tonight. Thank you all so much." Her delivery was absolutely flawless, ready for the evening news, but Natalie couldn't help noticing a tiny detail. The aggressive way Vanessa's knuckles turned white as her fingers tightened briefly around the microphone stand, and how her smile seemed frozen just a fraction of a second too long. Another polite wave of applause washed over the room. Brandon proudly handed the microphone off to the band leader, and the jazz band immediately began playing a lively, upbeat tune. The loud hum of hundreds of conversations instantly resumed. Waiters magically appeared out of nowhere with fresh flutes of champagne for the guests. Damian turned his body toward Natalie, looking down at her with a quiet, incredibly proud smile. "You've handled yourself like an absolute queen tonight," he whispered warmly. His deep voice wrapped around her like a protective, impenetrable veil right in the middle of the chaotic storm. She let out a long, shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since they walked in. "I think that's officially enough closure for me for one lifetime," she said softly, leaning into him. "Maybe we can slip out soon." The heavy weight of the room, the prying eyes, the carefully curated social masks, it was all starting to feel suffocatingly familiar. But just before they could turn to move toward the coat check, a harsh, grating voice sneered from directly behind them. "Slipping out so soon? You haven't even properly congratulated the happy couple to their faces." Natalie turned around slowly. It was Brandon's mother, Patricia Walsh. She was a deeply bitter woman famously known in their circles for her love of oversized pearls, expensive gin, and thinly veiled brutal judgment. She had actually once adored Natalie, back when Brandon was a nobody. That affection violently changed immediately after the divorce, when Patricia had apparently decided that the failure of the marriage, and any flaw in her perfect son, was entirely Natalie's fault. The tight smile plastered on Patricia's painted lips was practiced, but her cold eyes held incredibly sharp edges. "Hello, Patricia," Natalie said, fighting the urge to shrink back, keeping her voice perfectly level. She straightened her bare shoulders, absolutely refusing to flinch under the older woman's glare. Patricia's judgmental eyes flicked instantly over to Damian, slowly surveying him from head to toe with open, insulting skepticism. The way she studied him felt significantly less like polite curiosity and much more like a pawnshop appraisal. "And exactly who is this gentleman?" Patricia asked, her tone dripping with condescension. Before Natalie could answer and defend him, Damian smiled, a terrifyingly polite, completely unbothered smile. "My name is Damian Westwood, ma'am. I'm here tonight with Natalie." Patricia's gaze narrowed into slits as though her brain were rapidly, mentally calculating his net worth based on the cut of his tuxedo. Her bony fingers twitched slightly around her beaded clutch purse, betraying a sudden, tiny flicker of recognition. "You look oddly familiar. Have we met before?" Damian remained perfectly composed, a masterclass in restraint. "I'm not entirely sure," he said evenly, his tone giving nothing away. "Perhaps we crossed paths at a charity gala in the city." There was a barely perceptible shift in his broad posture, incredibly subtle, but he was suddenly highly alert. "That must be it then," Patricia said with a dismissive sniff, though her pinched expression didn't soften in the slightest. If anything, it grew much more suspiciously curious. She turned her attention sharply back to Natalie, aiming for the jugular. "I suppose it's a good thing you've finally moved on, Natalie, though some of us in the family still wonder if you ever truly appreciated everything Brandon graciously brought to your very simple life." Damian's strong jaw tightened visibly at the blatant insult, but he said absolutely nothing, respectfully stepping back to let Natalie handle her own battles. A quiet, terrifying storm churned deep in his dark eyes, though his hands remained calmly, loosely at his sides. And handle it she did. "With all due respect, Patricia," Natalie said, her voice eerily calm and ringing with total authority, "that is absolutely no longer any of your concern. I genuinely wish Brandon and Vanessa well." Her voice was soft and even, but right beneath it lay a razor-sharp blade of forged steel. Patricia's heavily lipsticked lips thinned into a furious white line. "Well, do enjoy the rest of the party." She pivoted sharply on her heel and walked rapidly away, trailing an aura of furious tension like a cloud of cheap, heavy perfume. For a brief, fleeting moment, Natalie could almost hear the pathetic echo of the frightened young woman she used to be, a girl so incredibly desperate for Patricia's maternal approval that she would have apologized for breathing. But that weak woman was dead and gone. Damian placed a gentle, supportive hand on the bare skin of Natalie's back. "Are you all right?" "I'm perfectly fine," she said quietly, and realized with a shock that it was true. "Let's just get some air." They strolled out together through the French doors to a massive, ornate stone terrace overlooking the glittering, sprawling city below. The loud music, the clinking glasses, and the soft, oppressive hum of networking conversation from inside instantly faded into the peaceful background. Natalie finally exhaled fully, releasing a deep, heavy breath that had felt painfully stuck in the center of her chest all night. The terrible tension knotting between her shoulder blades finally loosened. "That awful woman always made me feel so incredibly inadequate," she murmured into the night air. The raw admission sat heavy on her tongue, a deep, vulnerable truth she hadn't voiced aloud in years. Damian stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and rubbing her bare shoulders gently. "You are so far from inadequate, Natalie. I am incredibly proud of you for standing your ground in there." His words were incredibly simple, but the raw, unhidden sincerity in them made her throat tighten with emotion. A sudden, cool gust of wind tousled her dark hair. Natalie turned in his arms toward him, opening her mouth to thank him again, when a sudden, chaotic swirl of raised voices and rapidly rising, panicked chatter from inside the ballroom violently caught their attention. They exchanged a deeply worried glance and quickly stepped back inside through the glass doors. The shift in the room's energy was immediate and terrifying. Something had drastically shifted. The perfect facade of the night had cracked wide open. At the front of the lavish room, Brandon stood once more at the microphone, clutching the stand, with Vanessa standing rigidly beside him. But this time, neither of them looked happy or celebratory. They looked deeply, horribly flustered. Their highly practiced poise had fractured entirely under some unseen pressure, and the entire room of billionaires and power brokers sensed blood in the water. "Please, everyone, I ask that you remain calm," Brandon's voice echoed loudly through the speakers, sounding tight, panicked, and overly controlled. The crowded room buzzed with massive confusion. Wealthy guests shifted uncomfortably in their designer clothes. The low hum of upper-class unease grew significantly louder with every ticking second. Natalie spotted a very large, imposing hotel security guard pushing his way aggressively through the dense crowd, his eyes scanning the room. He was heading straight toward where she and Damian stood. Her pulse spiked instantly, a reflexive, sickening dread curling deep in her stomach like thick black smoke. "Excuse me, Mr. Westwood," the burly guard said, stopping in front of them, his eyes darting nervously between Damian and Brandon up at the microphone. "Could you please come with me immediately?" Natalie's heart sank into her shoes. She gripped Damian's tuxedo arm tightly. "What's going on?" The security guard looked incredibly uneasy, shifting his weight. We received an anonymous tip that someone might be here tonight under false, fraudulent pretenses." He didn't sound entirely convinced by his own words, but hotel protocol had strictly overridden any courtesy. A dead, horrifying hush fell over the entire ballroom. Hundreds of heads turned to stare directly at them. Malicious murmurs spread through the crowd like a raging wildfire. Cell phones were already being raised into the air. Some people were filming the confrontation, while others were furiously texting the gossip. A massive social scandal was blooming in real time. Brandon took the microphone again, looking down from the stage. "Mr. Damian Westwood, we need to officially verify your credentials. We simply can't allow anyone to crash this private, elite event." His voice was loud and calm, but his eyes flickered with something much darker as he looked at Natalie. Was it petty satisfaction or desperate self-preservation? Natalie's mouth dropped open in sheer, unadulterated disbelief. She stared up at Brandon, her eyes flashing with pure fury. "You personally invited us," she hissed furiously under her breath. But the terrible damage was already done. The foul insinuation that Damian was a fraud or a grifter hung thickly in the air like a permanent, ugly stain. Vanessa stepped forward to the microphone, clearly unnerved and furious at her fiancé. "Brandon, we really don't need to make this a public scene," she said carefully, her voice low but caught by the mic. The extreme strain in her tone completely betrayed her deep embarrassment and her absolute terror of losing control of her perfect night. Damian, completely unbothered by the stares of 100 billionaires, raised his hands in a slow, incredibly calm, pacifying gesture. "It's perfectly all right," he said evenly, his deep voice carrying without a microphone, addressing the nervous security guard. "I am more than happy to clarify exactly who I am." He turned slowly to the massive room, his sharp eyes scanning the sea of curious, judgmental faces. Some stared at him with open, ugly suspicion, others with thinly veiled, hungry amusement. Very few dared to blink. "But," Damian continued, his voice ringing with absolute, terrifying authority, "I would very much like to know exactly who is behind this so-called anonymous tip." People whispered frantically behind their hands. The air crackled with electric speculation. Natalie looked sharply at Brandon, her suspicion rising rapidly. Had her petty ex-husband deliberately orchestrated this entire humiliation? Brandon just looked highly confused and unsure of what to do next. But standing nearby, Patricia Walsh stood with a look of immense, smug satisfaction plastered on her wrinkled face. Her vile expression said exactly what her son didn't have the guts to say. "This is the ultimate punishment for you stepping outside your lowly station, Natalie." Then, from the far, darkened corner of the ballroom, a loud, booming voice cut violently through the heavy tension. "I place the call." Every single head in the room whipped around. A well-dressed, imposing older man with silver hair stepped aggressively forward from the shadows. It was someone Natalie instantly recognized from the society papers. Gerald Preston, Vanessa's billionaire father. He stepped heavily into the dead center of the room, leveling Damian with a cold, assessing, and utterly ruthless stare. The silence in the room deepened, growing heavy with the metallic scent of immense power being wielded like a butcher's blade. "I've heard several disturbing rumors about you recently, Mr. Westwood," Gerald Preston said, his voice clipped, loud, and incredibly firm. "Rumors that you baselessly claim to be vastly wealthy and philanthropic. But no one in my extensive network seems able to verify the actual source of your supposed fortune." He looked around the hushed room, rallying the elites. "We simply can't allow just anyone to infiltrate these highly exclusive circles." And just like that, the polite invitation became a brutal, public interrogation. Natalie felt raw, fiery outrage boil hot in her veins. She stepped forward to defend him. "He's not just anyone. He's—" Damian gently but firmly squeezed her hand, smoothly stepping in front of her, signaling her to stay perfectly calm. He turned his attention to Gerald Preston with remarkable, almost frightening composure. "Sir, you are absolutely right. I typically keep a very low, strictly private profile about my finances and my holdings," Damian said steadily, his voice echoing in the dead quiet room. "But I can assure you, and everyone else here, that I am more than qualified to be in this room tonight. If you'd prefer, we can easily step aside into a private office and verify whatever financial credentials you feel you need to see." A horribly tense, suffocating silence followed his offer. Brandon cleared his throat nervously at the microphone, completely unsure of what to do now that the situation had escalated beyond his control. Vanessa looked absolutely horrified, clearly mortified by her father's aggressive, classless public outburst at her engagement party. The large security guard hovered awkwardly, sweating, awaiting further instructions. Without missing a single beat, Damian calmly reached his hand into the silk inside pocket of his custom tuxedo jacket and retrieved a heavy, black, matte finish business card. He handed it smoothly to the security guard. "If you call the private number listed on the back of this card," Damian said coolly, his voice carrying perfectly, "my family's executive office will immediately confirm my identity. I am the principal owner and majority investor in Architect Holdings, among several other global ventures." A massive, audible ripple of pure shock swept violently through the crowded room. Architect Holdings wasn't just a company, it was a massive, trillion-dollar titan in the global technology industry. The stunning recognition spread through the crowd of investors like wildfire. Gerald Preston's arrogant face instantly lost 3 shades of color as he aggressively snatched the black card from the hesitant guard's hand and read the gold foil print. Brandon's expression flickered wildly, caught somewhere in a miserable purgatory between total confusion, crushing humiliation, and sickening envy. Vanessa's powerful father exhaled a sharp, shaky breath, clearly and immediately realizing he had just made a massive, potentially career-ending mistake by publicly questioning and insulting Damian Westwood. The security guard spoke quietly and frantically into his earpiece. A tense moment later, he nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with fear. It's absolutely confirmed, sir. The guard practically bowed. My deepest, most sincere apologies, Mr. Westwood. He backed away quickly, leaving Damian free to stand unhindered in the center of the room like a conquering king. An incredibly uncomfortable, heavy silence settled like a thick blanket over the entire ballroom. Damian didn't gloat. He didn't demand an apology. He simply turned back to Brandon and Vanessa on the stage, his voice perfectly even but terrifyingly firm. Congratulations again on your engagement, he said, the words echoing like a final verdict. But I think we will be leaving now. With that, he gently took Natalie's arm and led her proudly and slowly toward the grand exit. The crowd physically parted for them like the Red Sea. Amira trailed happily behind them, muttering highly entertaining, colorful curses under her breath about the total absurdity of the scene they had just endured. Outside in the opulent hotel lobby, safely away from the crowd, Natalie's pent-up emotions finally spilled over. I absolutely cannot believe they tried to throw you out of there like you were some kind of cheap fraud, she said, her voice shaking, blinking back hot tears of protective fury. Damian's stoic expression instantly softened as he looked down at her. He pulled her into a warm embrace. I've dealt with much worse people than them, Natalie. Let's just go home. As they stepped out into the cool, crisp night air and into their waiting car, one undeniable truth burned incredibly bright in Natalie's mind. Brandon and Vanessa's family hadn't just tried to humiliate her tonight to make themselves feel bigger. They had foolishly tried to publicly discredit Damian. The polite, societal gloves were completely off now, and she knew, deep in her bones, that their next encounter wouldn't just be awkward. It would be explosive. The morning after the disastrous, dramatic engagement soiree, social media exploded with wild speculation. Word had spread like wildfire about the tense confrontation at the Four Seasons. Elite society blogs, financial forums, and local gossip tabloids ran wild with aggressive headlines. Billionaire called out at elite party, identity challenged in public showdown. Investor mistaken for party crasher, fiancé's father sparks showdown at lavish engagement. Those were just a few of the many sensational headlines circulating the internet as Natalie woke up. In Damian's bed to a massive flood of text messages from Amira. The texts gleefully detailed the brutal online aftermath of the night's fiasco, including blurry screenshots, video clips taken from the back of the room, and viral social media threads with trending hashtags like Partygate and Westwood Mystery. The internet was absolutely feasting on the drama of old money embarrassing itself. Even Brandon had desperately called her phone late in the night, leaving a pathetic voicemail when she had absolutely no intention of answering. Still, morbid curiosity got the better of her as she sat in bed holding her phone. She tapped play. Natalie. Hey, listen, I'm so sorry about what happened tonight. I had absolutely no idea Vanessa's father would react that way or do that. Look, maybe we can meet up and talk sometime soon. Clear the air? Let me know. She deleted the sad message without a single second of hesitation, feeling highly irritated but strangely, deeply satisfied. The sound of his voice, which was once so incredibly familiar and comforting to her, now felt like a dusty relic from a completely different life, a life she had absolutely no desire to ever reopen. At least now, Damian's true identity was no longer a guarded mystery to anyone in the city. He wasn't just the calm, reserved, handsome man at her side anymore. He was now undeniably seen by the world as a massively powerful figure with an intimidating presence in elite financial circles. And he had handled the chaotic, insulting situation with the exact same quiet, impenetrable strength he always carried. Not once had he flinched under the pressure. Not once had he lashed out in anger or ego. That incredible restraint, that quiet grace under fire, spoke volumes more about his character than any viral headline ever could. Later that morning, Damian invited Natalie to join him in the kitchen of his penthouse for breakfast. Over warm, buttery croissants and incredibly strong dark coffee, they casually debriefed the entire bizarre event, his tone colored with a light, easy amusement. "I guess the Prestons really thought I was some slick con artist who just sweet-talked my way into high society," he said, taking a sip of coffee and shaking his head with a dry, rumbling chuckle. "It's honestly not the first time someone's doubted my intentions or my background." But this time, Natalie could hear the faint, hidden weariness beneath his humor. She heard the familiar sting of being constantly questioned, not for what he had actually done or accomplished in life, but entirely for what his wealth represented to greedy people. Natalie frowned over the rim of her ceramic mug, feeling fiercely protective. "It's not fair to you. You've done so much good for the world with your foundation. You shouldn't have to constantly keep proving yourself to horrible people." Her voice sharpened, vibrating with anger on his behalf. She hated that this shallow world demanded financial credentials before it granted basic human decency. He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. "Money massively complicates things, Natalie. People see a fortune attached to a name, and they either want to extract something from you, or they immediately assume you're hiding something sinister." He looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling window briefly, his eyes flicking toward the city skyline as if searching the clouds for some simpler version of himself he used to be. He reached across the small cafe table in his penthouse kitchen, gently brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "That's a big part of why I don't talk about my businesses much. But I also didn't ever want you getting caught in the nasty crossfire of my world, either." Natalie shook her head firmly, gently intertwining her slender fingers with his large ones. "I am so incredibly proud of who you are, Damian. Every part of you. If someone in this city has a problem with it, that is entirely on them." Her words came out firm and unwavering, because she meant absolutely every syllable. A beautiful flicker of softness lit up his stoic expression, and he leaned across the table to press a gentle, lingering kiss to her forehead. It lingered slightly longer than usual, as if he were trying to communicate the deep, profound things that his words didn't yet dare to say. Just then, his phone buzzed violently on the glass table. He checked the screen, his dark brows furrowing deeply. "Is everything okay?" Natalie asked. Her stomach dipped slightly, her intuition already sensing an incoming shift. He sighed heavily, picking up the phone. "Something highly urgent just came up with one of my tech companies. There's a massive acquisition. Deal hitting a critical legal snag. I'm going to need to fly to London tomorrow to handle it in person." Natalie set down her coffee cup, concern creeping into her voice. "For how long?" "A couple of days, maybe a full week. I'm not entirely sure yet." "Still," Damian exhaled, rubbing the tense back of his neck in frustration. "I am so sorry about the awful timing. I absolutely hate leaving you right now, especially after everything that just happened last night with Brandon." Natalie offered a soft, reassuring, brave smile. "Don't worry about me for a second. Go handle your business empire. I will be perfectly fine here." They spent the rest of the rainy day together, strolling hand in hand through the park under an umbrella and browsing a quiet, local art exhibit, deliberately choosing to tune out the relentless media frenzy swirling around them on their phones. Natalie felt a deepening, profound sense of calm in Damian's presence, as if together they were an island that could weather any storm. Yet, underneath her outward serenity, a dark, lingering suspicion simmered in her gut. Brandon had never, ever liked being overshadowed by anyone. He thrived entirely on total control and violently despised being made to look weak, foolish, or financially inferior. Now that Damian's true identity and his staggering wealth were public knowledge, Natalie highly suspected Brandon would see it as a massive, personal threat to his ego. And when Brandon felt threatened, terrible trouble always tended to follow. Her dark intuition proved to be terrifyingly accurate. Late that afternoon, just as she was unlocking the door to return to her apartment, her cell phone buzzed in her purse. An unknown, unlisted number flashed brightly on the screen. She hesitated for a long moment, her thumb hovering, then finally answered. "Natalie. It's Vanessa." The voice on the other end trembled. It was attempting to sound composed, but it was barely holding together. "Can we please meet? I desperately need to talk to you about Brandon." Natalie's pulse quickened instantly. Vanessa? Why on earth would Brandon's new fiancée call her? Part of her immediately braced for some kind of vicious ambush or confrontation. Maybe even a wild accusation that Natalie had deliberately orchestrated the dramatic reveal to upstage the engagement soiree. But the terrifying shakiness in Vanessa's usually confident voice wasn't aggressive at all. It was incredibly fragile. She sounded broken. Curiosity and a strange sense of female solidarity got the better of her. They quietly agreed to meet at a small, out-of-the-way tea shop the very next day. When the strange call ended, Natalie sat frozen on her couch for a long moment, her stomach twisting in knots. Vanessa hadn't sounded smug, and she hadn't sounded performative. She had sounded almost desperate, maybe the picture-perfect, diamond-encrusted facade of Brandon and Vanessa's high society engagement was already beginning to crack under the pressure. And if so, what dark, hidden secrets might come spilling out of the wreckage? The next day, heavy gray clouds hung low over the city as Natalie stepped into Marlowe's tea house in Midtown. A cozy, obscure spot heavily known for its imported loose-leaf blends and calming, quiet ambience. She slipped into a dark, secluded corner booth, scanning the softly lit space for her ex-husband's fiancée. Vanessa arrived shortly after, looking like a ghost. She was wearing a heavy black trench coat over a simple cream blouse. Her usually perfect posture was stiff and defensive, and when she removed her coat, her pale hands trembled ever so slightly. "Thank you so much for meeting me," Vanessa said quietly, sliding into the booth and settling across from her. Natalie studied her face closely. There were deep, dark purple shadows under her eyes, hastily covered with expensive concealer. She didn't look anything like the glowing, radiant fiancée from the engagement party just days ago. "No problem," Natalie replied gently, keeping her guard up but her tone soft. "What's going on? Vanessa?" A waitress came by, and Vanessa nervously ordered a calming chamomile tea. Natalie asked for a strong Earl Grey. They sat in a highly awkward, heavy silence until the server finally left them alone. Vanessa cleared her throat, looking down at the table. "I know this might sound incredibly strange, coming to you of all people, but I don't have many people in my life I can actually talk to about Brandon." She hesitated, her eyes dropping to her twisting hands. "He never speaks much about you. But I did some quiet digging on my own recently. I know exactly how your marriage ended. Abruptly, painfully." Natalie's stomach tightened into a hard knot. "What exactly do you want to know?" Vanessa laced her trembling fingers together tightly. Her knuckles turned bone white, as if she were physically bracing herself against her own terrifying thoughts. Is he always this incredibly controlling?" She hesitated, taking a shaky breath, then continued, her voice quiet but edged with mounting frustration. "I've seen tiny glimpses of it before. But last night, how he handled the entire fiasco with your boyfriend. He was absolutely furious when we got home. Not because my father publicly embarrassed Damian, but because Brandon felt completely overshadowed by his wealth. We had a huge, terrifying fight afterward. Her bottom lip trembled just for a second before she steeled herself, biting down on it. Natalie studied Vanessa's pale face, carefully weighing how honest she needed to be. She recognized that haunted, trapped look in Vanessa's eyes. She had worn it herself once, staring into the bathroom mirror at 2 a.m. There was absolutely no point in sugarcoating the ugly truth to protect a man who didn't deserve it. Brandon has a pathological need to win, Natalie began softly, leaning forward. Everything in our marriage eventually turned into a ruthless competition. It didn't start out that way. To be fair, in college he was driven, but he was kind. But over time, as he climbed the ladder, his ambition became absolutely everything to him. He set these impossibly high, shifting expectations for me, and if I didn't perfectly meet them, he would completely tear me down emotionally. Her voice tightened, not with fresh anger, but with the heavy, sad memory of being slowly, methodically eroded as a human being. She paused, making sure Vanessa was listening. He never, ever saw me as his true equal. It was always about him, his image, and his success. Vanessa's eyes shimmered with bright, unshed tears. She blinked incredibly fast, like she fiercely refused to let them fall. Not here in public. Not yet. I'm starting to see that, too, Vanessa whispered. After last night, he stormed around my father's penthouse, shouting about how he'd be damned if he let some nobody show him up in his own city. I pointed out that Damian is clearly not a nobody, and Brandon absolutely lost his mind. He threw a glass at the wall. She looked down at her shaking hands, her voice trembling. I have my own money. I have family connections. But Brandon wants much more than that. He wants to actively use me to help him climb over everyone else. Her sad words cracked under the immense weight of her realization, as if she were finally hearing herself say the terrible truth out loud for the very first time. Natalie felt a deep pang of profound empathy, despite all the pain Brandon had once caused her. She vividly remembered how charming and charismatic he could be at first, how wildly persuasive, how incredibly easy it was to get caught up in the powerful gravity of his oversized dreams. He made you feel like you were building something massive and important together, until you finally realized that the foundation of his empire was built entirely out of your broken pieces. So, why reach out to me specifically? Natalie asked gently, sipping her tea. Vanessa hesitated, then glanced nervously around the quiet tea shop, her eyes darting as though constantly checking for hidden eavesdroppers. Even here, in a perfectly safe, quiet booth surrounded by warm lighting and the soothing sound of clinking porcelain cups, she looked like a hunted animal. Because I'm not sure I can actually go through with this engagement anymore, Vanessa confessed, her voice barely a breath. And I desperately need to know if Brandon has ever done anything highly questionable in the past, financially or otherwise. She swallowed hard. My powerful father is heavily pressuring me to go through with the wedding to save face in the press, but I am genuinely scared. Her voice barely made it past her pale lips. But deep fear has a very distinct sound, and Natalie heard it loud and clear. Natalie's thoughts drifted rapidly back to the explosive, late-night fights over money during the final months of her marriage. She remembered Brandon once trying aggressively to convince her to illegally dip into her personal business savings to secretly fund one of his highly risky, off-the-books ventures. When she flatly refused, he had called her short-sighted, stupid, and unsupportive. And that had just been the start of the financial abuse. Every single disagreement after that day had a strict monetary price attached to it. But illegal? Natalie asked, thinking hard. Not to my direct knowledge, she said carefully. I can't say I ever saw him break the law on paper, but he definitely, consistently manipulates legal situations and loopholes to serve himself, usually at someone else's severe expense. She saw a complex flicker of both relief and deep dread in Vanessa's eyes. Confirmation of your worst fears never actually felt clean. Vanessa exhaled a long breath. as if something vital inside her had finally deflated. "I see," she murmured. Their fresh teas arrived, steaming hot, and Vanessa stirred hers distractedly, the silver spoon clinking against the china. "He's aggressively pressuring me to sign an ironclad prenup, one that heavily, suspiciously favors him. It has something buried in the legal jargon about his control over future earnings tied to my father's corporate investments." Natalie's eyebrows shot up in shock. "Vanessa, that is a huge, screaming red flag." "I know," Vanessa whispered, a single tear finally threatening to spill over her lashes. "He wants me to sign it blindly before we even set an official wedding date. My father thinks it's just smart, aggressive business on Brandon's part. But I am incredibly uncomfortable with it. And after last night, seeing the terrifying way he went on a rampage about Damian, I realized I don't even really know the man I'm engaged to." A massive wave of sisterly sympathy rolled through Natalie. As much deep anger as she still held toward Brandon, she couldn't deny for a second that Vanessa was completely trapped in a highly toxic, dangerous situation. "You have absolutely every right to be cautious," Natalie said firmly, reaching across the table to lightly touch Vanessa's arm. "Listen to me. If you ever need someone to talk to who understands him, or just a safe place to hide and clear your head, you can reach out to me. I am not your enemy. Brandon is my past." Vanessa bowed her head, a tear finally falling onto the table. "Thank you. I appreciate that more than you know." They sipped their tea in a thoughtful, heavy silence for a few minutes. After a while, Vanessa spoke again, her voice finding a tiny sliver of resolve. "I'm going to talk to him tonight. I'm planning to confront Brandon about officially postponing the wedding, at least until I feel much more secure about everything in the contracts. I don't know how violently he'll take it." Natalie's mind flashed vividly to terrifying memories of Brandon's explosive volatility. How incredibly quickly his smooth charm could curdle and turn to screaming rage when he felt challenged or denied what he wanted. "Whatever you decide to do, please be safe," Natalie said fiercely, locking eyes with her. "Brandon can be incredibly vindictive, especially if he feels financially or socially cornered. Do not do it alone in an empty apartment. Keep your father and your support system very close by." Vanessa nodded, wiping her eyes and blinking back the remaining tears. "I will. And Natalie, about what happened at the engagement party, I am so deeply sorry for how my father treated Damian. My dad assumes everyone's out to exploit our family's money, but he was completely wrong. He was way out of line." Natalie gave a small, genuinely kind smile. "Apology accepted. Vanessa, don't worry about Damian. He can handle himself." They paid the bill and stepped outside the warm tea shop together. The heavy gray clouds were still ominous above them. As Vanessa walked off toward a waiting town car, her shoulders hunched defensively against the cold wind, Natalie stood perfectly still on the sidewalk, watching her disappear down the busy street. Her heart was a complex, tangled knot of emotions. Deep pity for Vanessa, rising disgust for Brandon, and a massive, overwhelming flicker of relief. She had successfully escaped that dark, manipulative world. But something deep in her gut told her that this quiet conversation wasn't the end of it. It was merely the calm before a devastating hurricane. Brandon, when cornered and threatened with losing his prize, could be absolutely ruthless. And if Vanessa truly chose to push back against his demands, she might inadvertently expose a terrifying side of him that Natalie knew all too well. The dark side that never, ever forgave and never forgot. The very next morning, Natalie was violently awakened by a flurry of frantic, back-to-back texts from Amira. Still half asleep and rubbing her eyes, she reached for the TV remote on her nightstand and turned on the local news channel. A massive, bright red breaking news banner flashed urgently across the bottom of the screen. Tech investor Brandon Walsh under federal investigation for massive corporate fraud. Natalie sat straight up in bed, her heart pounding. just days after his self-important, extravagant engagement soiree. Brandon was now the prime subject of a high-profile, devastating federal inquiry into alleged massive financial crimes. The grim-faced news reporters claimed he had deliberately falsified financial records in a recent corporate merger, allegedly exploiting his new fiancée's powerful family connections and insider information for his own massive personal gain. Natalie stared blankly at the news report, a wild storm of conflicting emotions swirling inside her chest. Total shock, deep vindication, and a strange, residual, hollow sadness for a man she had once truly loved. The morning headlines were absolutely brutal. Brandon's handsome face was plastered across every single media outlet, looking like a common criminal. His spectacular downfall wasn't just public, it was cinematic and absolute. Her phone rang loudly in her hand. It was Amira, completely breathless with the latest updates. "It's everywhere," Amira basically screamed into the phone. "He's completely toxic now. All his major investors are pulling their money out left and right. Vanessa's dad, Gerald Preston, officially pulled all of his family's financial support this morning. And get this, word on the street is that Vanessa herself is the one who handed over the digital evidence to the federal investigators." She completely flipped on him, Nat. Amira's tone was half in pure shock, half in absolute, gleeful awe. As Natalie sat in bed, desperately trying to process the sheer magnitude of it all, another call buzzed in on call waiting. It was an unknown, unlisted number. She switched over and answered it, her body already instinctively bracing for impact. Her pulse spiked. A deeply familiar dread crept into her bones like freezing air slipping under a door. "Natalie." It came the unmistakable, desperate voice of Brandon. It was raw, incredibly shaky, and utterly devoid of its usual arrogance. "I'm completely out of options," he babbled, sounding manic. "They froze all my bank accounts. Vanessa is gone. She took everything. You have to help me, Nat." His voice cracked pathetically halfway through the sentence, and for a brief, startling moment, he didn't sound anything like the powerful man who once stood so confidently on high pedestals judging the world. He sounded exactly like a terrified little boy watching his entire paper kingdom burn to the ground. His panicked words tumbled out of the receiver like a landslide, pure panic heavily laced with shock and disbelief. She could almost hear him pacing frantically across a hardwood floor, completely unraveling. Through the phone, there was the chaotic sound of papers rustling violently, heavy footsteps, a hollow echo in the background. His world was ending in real time. "Brandon," she said carefully, her voice dropping to a calm, icy register. "I am not your wife anymore, and your massive legal problems are not mine to solve. If you forged corporate documents and deliberately misled investors to get rich, that is entirely on you." He let out a jagged, bitter, slightly hysterical laugh. "Everyone thinks they know so much better. All these fake, high society people. They only care about winning. I just played the game by their exact rules. And now they're making me the villain. Even you're abandoning me when I need you most." There it was again, that deeply familiar, toxic voice of absolute entitlement brilliantly cloaked in professional victimhood. His tone suddenly turned sharp, mean, and accusatory. "You think Damian and his billions will always be there to clean up your pathetic messes?" The venom in his desperate words startled her for a second. Not because it hurt her feelings, but because it absolutely no longer had any power over her soul. Natalie stiffened her spine, but kept her voice perfectly, terrifyingly steady. "My life is no longer entangled with yours. Brandon, do not ever call this number again." Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled the phone away and pressed the red button to hang up, but she wasn't shaking from fear. She was shaking from the massive, overwhelming rush of absolute release. The line went dead. Natalie sat there in the quiet of her bedroom, shaken yet oddly, profoundly free. It was the heavy, echoing silence afterward that struck her the most. The room wasn't empty, it was peaceful. In that exact moment, she realized something incredibly vital to her soul. Brandon's total collapse wasn't her responsibility, and it wasn't her tragedy. His spectacular downfall had actually brought her the one single thing she hadn't even realized she was still desperately waiting for: absolute closure. He was no longer a terrifying ghost from her past haunting her every move. He was just a sad, pathetic cautionary tale, a textbook example of unchecked greed and ambition destroying a life. And she was finally, completely done carrying the heavy, suffocating weight of his failures. 2 days later, Damian returned early from his urgent business trip in London. As the private elevator doors chimed and opened directly into the penthouse, and she saw him step inside carrying his sleek travel bag, a massive wave of pure relief rushed through Natalie like a warm tidal wave. Her handbag slipped forgotten from her hand onto the floor as she crossed the massive room and threw her arms tightly around his neck. He dropped his bag and held her incredibly close, burying his face in her neck, gently stroking her dark hair. "I missed you so much," he murmured, kissing her shoulder. She led him over to the plush velvet sofa, still holding tightly onto his large hand. "Damian," she began softly, looking into his tired but kind eyes. "While you were away, Brandon's entire world completely collapsed." She sat there and explained absolutely everything to him. "He's under federal investigation for fraud. Vanessa totally called off the engagement and turned him in to the authorities. And he's been calling my phone, begging me for financial help." Damian's brow furrowed with immediate, protective concern. "He called you directly? Did he threaten you?" She shook her head. "No. He just wants money to pay for a better defense lawyer." I said absolutely no. It felt a little cruel at the moment, but I cannot let him drag me back down into his chaotic, toxic life. Damian exhaled a long, deep breath, pure relief clear in his handsome expression. "I am so incredibly proud of you for setting those hard boundaries, Natalie." He reached up and gently cupped her cheek. "If you ever feel threatened by him or anyone else, I will do absolutely whatever it takes to protect you." They spent the next few hours curled up on the sofa, catching up on everything, talking through the absolute whirlwind of Brandon's legal drama and the relentless, exhausting media coverage. Even the international tabloids had taken an intense interest in the story, drawing sharp, highly favorable contrasts between Damian's quiet, dignified philanthropic influence and Brandon's loud, desperate, public unraveling. Natalie hated the constant gossip and the cameras, but Damian reassured her calmly that the rumors and the news cycle would pass. "They always do," he said with a knowing smile. That evening, wanting to celebrate his return, they attended a beautiful, low-key charity art auction supporting local, underprivileged artists in the city. As they entered the sleek, modern, white-walled gallery, cameras flashed near the entrance. Photographers snapped dozens of shots of Damian, who was now publicly recognized as one of the city's most powerful and generous philanthropists. Natalie tensed momentarily under the sudden barrage of attention, her grip tightening on his arm. But Damian leaned in close with a warm, reassuring smile. "Relax, darling. We're just here for a good cause." Encouraged by his immense warmth, she relaxed her shoulders and moved gracefully through the gallery, sipping wine and admiring various pieces until she stopped dead in her tracks in front of one specific canvas. It was a bold, vibrant, abstract painting full of explosive life, light, and beautiful color. It looked exactly like freedom. Damian noticed her absolute awe. Without making a scene, he quietly outbid every other wealthy attendee in the room. And later that night, he gifted Natalie the massive piece with a subtle, deeply satisfied grin. Afterward, they hosted a small, intimate gathering back at Damian's penthouse, celebrating both Natalie's massive new design contract with the boutique hotel chain and the striking new art addition to her portfolio. Amira arrived early, throwing her arms around Natalie and immediately launching into the latest, juicy updates on Brandon's epic downfall. From canceled corporate contracts to furious, litigious investors backing out of his funds, his ruin was total. And while a very small, empathetic part of Natalie still felt a tiny sting of human pity for him, another, much larger part of her knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she had made the absolute right decision in walking away from him to save herself. Later that night, after the music had faded and all the guests had gone home, Natalie and Damian sat quietly together in the softly lit living room. The glittering city lights shimmered brightly through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting beautiful, dancing reflections on the newly mounted, vibrant painting across the room. With a half-empty glass of red wine in her hand, Natalie stared out at the sprawling, infinite skyline, feeling a profound, deep calm in her soul that she hadn't known in years. Gone forever were the dark, miserable days of constantly doubting her own worth, of shrinking herself to fit under Brandon's backhanded compliments and his relentless, grinding criticism. She turned on the couch to look at Damian, who was already watching her with that familiar, quiet, overwhelming tenderness in his eyes. "I never, ever thought I'd end up here," she said softly, her voice catching slightly in her throat with emotion. "A year ago, I was still sitting on a floor picking up the shattered pieces of my life from the divorce. Now, everything in the world feels possible." Damian reached out for her hand and pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to her knuckles. "You deserve a true partner who actually sees your brilliance, Natalie," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble. "Not someone who selfishly tears you down just to make himself feel bigger." A small, wry smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "As for everything else, my money, my corporate connections, the media, I want you to know something very important." He met her gaze, his eyes incredibly steady, piercing, and sincere. "I deeply admire your fierce independence. I am always here to support you, in whatever way you need, but you have already proven to me, and to the world, that you can stand powerfully on your own 2 feet. His beautiful words filled her chest with a radiating, golden warmth that completely melted away every last, lingering piece of doubt she had ever carried. Together, they stood up and stepped close to the wide glass window. The massive city stretched endlessly before them, an intricate, glowing tapestry of light, constant motion, and vibrant life. Night had fully fallen over the bay, but inside the secure, warm penthouse, a completely different kind of peace had permanently settled. It was a beautiful stillness that felt hard-earned, not simply gifted. Natalie leaned her head gently on Damian's strong shoulder, reflecting quietly on the timid, frightened woman she used to be. The woman who had once been so diminished by Brandon's cruel expectations, constantly made to feel like she wasn't smart enough, pretty enough, or wealthy enough. She remembered the awful way silence in their house had once meant pure fear, the way his "not now" had once meant "not you." But that weak, frightened woman was gone forever, buried in the past. In her place stood someone totally reborn, a fierce woman who had successfully reclaimed her inner confidence, who had brilliantly rediscovered her passionate love for architecture, and who had bravely opened her scarred heart to a good man who actively nurtured her biggest dreams instead of maliciously silencing them. She had built something entirely new, and this time she had built it from her very own, unshakable foundation. Down below the glass, the bright, chaotic, relentless pulse of the city surged forward, completely unmoved by one arrogant man's spectacular downfall or another woman's beautiful redemption. Yet, in that still, incredibly intimate moment high above the streets, Natalie felt something utterly profound, absolute freedom. It was a freedom not just from Brandon's toxic grip, but freedom from the heavy, exhausting weight of ever needing to prove her worth to anyone ever again. She was no longer haunted by the ghosts of the past. She stood proudly at the edge of something entirely new, something breathtakingly beautiful, hand in hand with a man whose quiet, unyielding strength and boundless devotion she cherished more than anything else in the world. There was absolutely no need for grand, loud declarations between them. His steady, loving presence said it all. Thank you so much for walking with us through Natalie's incredible journey, a profound story of deep heartbreak, cruel betrayal, fierce resilience, and ultimately, a beautiful, quiet triumph. She didn't just barely survive a painful chapter in her life, she rose spectacularly from the ashes of it. She bravely faced down the dark shadows of her past, completely let go of the exhausting need for toxic validation, and actively chose to rebuild herself, piece by piece, truth by truth. Her strength wasn't loud. It wasn't bitter or vengeful. It was incredibly steady, deeply intentional, and ultimately it made her free. She rebuilt her beautiful life not with chaotic noise, but with absolute clarity. Not with a desire for petty revenge, but with a deep desire for lasting peace. And maybe, just maybe, that is the deepest, most important message of all. Dear friend, life, as the great ancient Stoics often remind us, won't always go the way we hope or plan. People we trust will inevitably disappoint us. Grand plans will fall apart, but we are never, ever truly powerless. Every single day we wake up, we are given a powerful choice: to let the pain and trauma define who we are, or to actively use it as fuel to build something much better. Natalie's story is not just about a toxic love lost. It is a story about the profound, unshakable love she finally found within herself. It's about choosing to rise up, not because the world made it easy for her, but because she fiercely refused to stay broken on the floor. We don't get to choose what massive storms come into our lives to test us, but we do get to choose exactly who we are after the rain stops and the storms pass. So let today be the exact day you finally stop chasing the approval of people who don't matter, and start deeply honoring your own incredible strength. If this story moved something deep inside you, or if you saw even a tiny piece of your own difficult journey reflected in Natalie's brave path to freedom, we would be incredibly honored if you would tap the like button. Please share this video with someone in your life who might really need to hear this message of hope today. And subscribe to our channel for more meaningful stories that go far beyond the surface. We are here to tell the stories that remind us all that we are never alone in our struggles. Thank you so much for being here with us. You matter more than you know, and we will see you in the next story.